Imagine you are standing on the deck of a sinking ship. Most people are frantically treading water, trying to remember the one swimming lesson they took 10 years ago. But then, there is one person calm, observant, who isn't just swimming. He is calculating the current, the water temperature, the structural integrity of the hull, and the psychological panic of the crowd. He isn't just trying to survive, he's reading the entire ocean. That man was Charlie Munger. To the uninitiated, he was simply Warren Buffett's silent partner, the witty billionaire behind the curtain of Berkshire Hathaway. But to those who studied the architecture of the mind, he was the author of a different kind of scripture. This is the story of poor Charlie's Almanack, a book that isn't really about money, though it will teach you how to make it. It is a book about the pursuit of worldly wisdom. In a world that rewards specialist people who know more and more about less and less, Munger was a generalist in the most radical sense. He believed that if you only have a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. To truly understand the world, he argued, you must build a latticework of mental models. You need the big ideas from biology, physics, psychology, and history, all interlaced in your mind, so you can see the big picture while everyone else is squinting at the details. In this journey, we're going to explore 3 pillars that defined Munger's life: the latticework, how to collect and connect the big ideas of the world; inversion, the art of thinking backward to solve the hardest problems; the psychology of human misjudgment, understanding the glitches in our evolutionary hardware that cause smart people to make disastrously stupid decisions. Charlie Munger didn't want to be a genius. He simply wanted to consistently avoid being a fool. He lived by a stoic, almost ancient code of rationality and intellectual honesty. As we walk through these chapters, I want you to set aside the pursuit of tips or hacks. Instead, we are going to learn how to think. We are going to deconstruct the Munger mind to see how a boy from Omaha during the Great Depression built a philosophy that remains the ultimate cheat code for the 21st century. Are you ready to stop looking at the nail and start building the house? Chapter 1. The Architect of Discipline. A Portrait of Charles T. Munger. How does a man become a billionaire? Not by chasing the next big thing, but by sitting still and waiting for the world to reveal its own foolishness. To understand the philosophy, we have to understand the man. Charlie Munger wasn't born with a silver spoon. He was forged in the furnace of the Great Depression. If you want to know why he valued margin of safety or why he was so obsessed with avoiding stupidity, you have to look at Omaha in the 1930s. The Omaha roots and the Great Depression. Imagine a young boy working in a grocery store buffet and earning $2 for 10 hours of back-breaking labor. There were no breaks, no complaints, and certainly no work-life balance. This was Charlie's introduction to the world. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the observation of human character. He saw his grandfather, a federal judge, helping family members who had lost everything. He saw the fragility of certainty. When the world collapses around you, you learn 2 things very quickly: the value of $1 and the absolute necessity of being prepared for the worst. This era didn't make Charlie cynical. It made him stoic. It taught him that the universe doesn't owe you a living, and if you want to be successful, you have to be more rational than the person standing next to you. The tragedy that defined the stoic. We often see the grumpy billionaire on stage, cracking jokes and eating See's candies, but Charlie's path was paved with immense personal suffering. In his late 20s, he faced a lollapalooza of misery, a failed marriage, the loss of his young son to leukemia, which Charlie paid for out of pocket while he was broke, walking the streets of Pasadena, crying, and a freak medical accident later in life that left him blind in one eye. Most people would break. They would turn to bitterness or self-pity. But Charlie used these moments to test his own philosophy. He asked himself, does feeling sorry for myself fix the problem? The answer was always a resounding no. This is where his inversion principle likely took root. Instead of asking, how can I be happy? He saw how easily life could make someone miserable, and he vowed to avoid the mental habits like self-pity that guarantee a failed life. He realized that reliability was the ultimate superpower. If you are the person who shows up, stays rational, and doesn't buckle under pressure, the world eventually clears a path for you. The transition from law to the latticework. Charlie was a world-class lawyer, but he realized early on that selling his time was a capped game. He didn't want to be a hired gun. He wanted to be the one holding the gold. This transition is crucial for anyone listening who feels stuck in a career. Charlie didn't just quit, he built a bridge, started investing in real estate and small businesses, applying a logic that was alien to most. He wasn't looking for deals, he was looking for quality. When he finally teamed up with Warren Buffett, he changed the trajectory of Berkshire Hathaway. At the time, Warren was a cigar-butt investor. He bought dying companies for cheap to get one last puff of profit. Charlie walked in and said, "Warren, stop buying junk just because it's cheap. It's much better to buy a wonderful company at a fair price than a fair company at a wonderful price." This shift required a massive ego check for Buffett, but it worked because Charlie wasn't arguing from emotion. He was arguing from math and psychology. He understood that a great business with a moat would compound forever, while a bad business would eventually drain your soul. The polymath's secret. Why was Charlie so much better at picking winners than the Wall Street geniuses with Ph.D.S? It's because he refused to be a specialist. He spent his life as a biography machine. He didn't just read. He deconstructed the lives of great men and women to see where they tripped. He studied biology to understand competition. He studied physics to understand equilibrium. He studied psychology to understand why we lie to ourselves. He lived by a simple, almost haunting rule. I never allow myself to have an opinion on anything that I don't know the other side's argument better than they do. Think about that for a second. In our modern age of social media echo chambers, where we shout opinions based on headlines, Munger's approach is like a cold bucket of water. He forced himself to be his own harshest critic. He destroyed his own best-loved ideas every year as a form of intellectual hygiene. This wasn't just a hobby. It was his primary defense mechanism against the standard social science model, which he believed led to mass delusion. The independent mind ultimately, the portrait of Charlie Munger, is a portrait of independence. He didn't care what the crowd was doing. If the entire world was buying tech stocks in 1999, he sat on his hands and read a book. If people called him the abominable no man because he rejected 99% of the deals that came across his desk, he smiled. He understood that to get extraordinary results, you have to be willing to look ordinary, or even foolish to the masses for long periods. He wasn't chasing wealth for the sake of Ferraris or private islands. He chased wealth because it bought him the right to say whatever he thought was true. For Charlie, truth was the ultimate luxury. He often told a story about a man who wanted to know where he was going to die so he would never go there. That sounds like a joke, but it's the blueprint of Munger's life. He spent 99 years studying failure, stupidity, and arrogance so that he could simply walk the other way. He was the architect of his own discipline, proving that a long life well lived is the result of a few good decisions and the avoidance of many bad ones. Key takeaway: success is not about being a genius. It is about the stoic endurance to stay rational when everyone else is panicking, and the discipline to build a mind that values truth over ego. Transition. But how do you actually build that mind? How do you move from a portrait of a man to a system for yourself? Do that, we have to look at Charlie's most famous concept, the Latticework of Mental Models. Chapter 2. The Latticework. How to build a multidisciplinary mind. If you've ever felt like the world is too complex to grasp, like you're drowning in a sea of data, but starving for actual wisdom, you aren't alone. Most of us go through life looking at the world through a keyhole. We are trained to be specialists. We are told to pick a lane, stay in it, and master it. But Charlie Munger would tell you that this man with a hammer syndrome is a recipe for disaster. If all you have is a hammer, you will spend your entire life hitting things that aren't nails, wondering why the world won't cooperate. To Charlie, the secret to navigating life, business, and relationships isn't knowing more, it's knowing the right things and seeing how they connect. He called this his latticework of mental models. Imagine your mind not as a filing cabinet where you store isolated facts, but as a literal physical lattice, crisscrossing structure where every new piece of information has a hook to latch onto. If you don't have the structure, you can't hold the facts. They just slip through and disappear. The big ideas from the big disciplines. Charlie's first rule of worldly wisdom is that you must have the big ideas from the big disciplines. You don't need to be a PhD in 80 different subjects. You just need to understand the 5% to 10% of concepts that do 90% of the heavy lifting. Think about physics. You don't need to solve complex quantum equations to understand the concept of critical mass or equilibrium. In business, just like in physics, there is a point where a company gains enough momentum that it becomes an unstoppable force. If you don't understand the physics of momentum, you might sell your boring index fund or your growing business right before it hits the point of escape velocity. Take biology. Charlie was obsessed with evolutionary biology. Why? Because the business world is an ecosystem. Companies are like species. They compete for resources. They adapt or they go extinct. If you understand niche construction, you understand why a small, specialized company can survive in a market dominated by a giant. They aren't fighting the giant. They are living in a crack where the giant's feet can't reach. Then there's mathematics. It's not calculus, but permutations and combinations. This is the math of what are the odds. Charlie believed that if you can't do basic probability in your head, you can't understand the Fermat Pascal. System, you are a one-legged man in an eskicking contest. You are essentially gambling with your life, while everyone else is playing a game of skill. The danger of the specialist. Why did Munger rail against the expert? Because an expert is often blinded by their own excellence. He once joked about a doctor who wanted to perform a specific surgery because it was the only thing he was good at, regardless of whether the patient actually needed it. When you only have one model, you force the world to fit it. This is why economists failed to predict the 2008 crash. Their models assumed rational actors, but they forgot to check the psychology bucket. They forgot that humans are prone to social proof and Deprivable superreaction syndrome. Charlie's approach requires a certain level of intellectual humility. It requires you to admit that your primary field of study is not enough. You have to be a collector of ideas. You should be reading a biography of a scientist on Monday, a book on bridge building on Wednesday, and a study on Pavlovian conditioning on Friday. Synergy, the 1 + 1 = 3 effect. The magic of the lattice work isn't just in the individual models, it's in their synthesis. Charlie called these Lollapalooza effects. This happens when 3 or 4 models all point in the same direction at the same time. Think about a cult. Why are they so effective? It's not just one thing. It's social proof. Everyone else is doing it. Combined with incentive-caused bias, the leader promises you heaven. Combined with consistency and commitment tendency, you've already given them your money, so you have to believe. When these models combine, they create a nuclear explosion of human behavior. If you only understand one of those models, you might miss the danger. But if you see the lattice, you see the explosion coming from a mile away. You become pre-vivid. You see the patterns of reality before they fully manifest. Practical application. How to build your lattice. So, how do you actually do this? You start by being a learning machine. Charlie famously said, "I have known no wise people who didn't read all the time. None, zero." Read broadly, not just deeply. If you are a coder, read about marketing. If you are a teacher, read about game theory. Ask why. And what is this like? When you learn a new concept, try to find an analogy in a completely different field. If you learn about inertia in physics, ask yourself, how does a large corporation show inertia? Why is it so hard to turn a big company around? Filter for the big ideas. Don't get bogged down in the trivia. Look for the principles that have stood the test of time. If a concept has been around for 100 years and still works like compound interest or the Pareto principle, it belongs in your lattice. The discipline of mental hygiene. Building a lattice work is a lifelong job. Requires you to constantly check your connections. Munger was famous for destroying his own ideas. He believed that if you couldn't argue the other person's point better than they could, you didn't have the right to an opinion. This is the ultimate form of mental hygiene. Most people spend their lives looking for evidence that they are right. Munger spent his life looking for evidence that he was wrong. He wanted to find the holes in his lattice so he could patch them before a major life decision fell through them. He didn't want to be smart in the sense of having a high IQ. He wanted to be sane. He wanted a mind that was a clear window through. She could see the world as it actually is, not as he wished it to be. The reward, a life of calm. The most beautiful part of the lattice work isn't the wealth it brings, though. It usually brings plenty. The reward is a sense of calm. When you have a multidisciplinary mind, you are rarely surprised. You see the booms and busts of the economy, the rises and falls of friendships. and the twists of your own career as part of a larger, predictable pattern. You stop reacting and start observing. You realize that while the world is complex, the rules that govern it are actually quite simple and few. By mastering those few rules and seeing how they interlace, you gain a level of worldly wisdom that makes you appear like a wizard to the specialists. Munger's lattice is a bridge over the chaos. It allows you to walk through the world with a sense of quiet confidence, knowing that no matter what problem lands on your desk, you have a mental hook ready to catch it. Key takeaway: you cannot truly understand anything if you only understand it in isolation. To gain wisdom, you must collect the big ideas from every major field and weave them into a mental lattice that allows you to see the connections between them. Transition. But even with a perfect lattice, the human brain has a way of tricking us. We don't just need to know what to think. We need to know how to think. And for that, we must turn to Charlie's favorite tool for unblocking the mind, the art of inversion. Chapter 3. Inversion. The power of thinking backward. There is a strange, almost mystical power in doing the opposite of what everyone else is doing. Most of our lives are spent in a frantic, forward-facing pursuit. We ask, how can I be happy? How can I get rich? How can I find the perfect partner? We focus on the plus side of the equation, adding goals, adding habits, and adding complexity. But Charlie Munger looked at the world differently. He looked at it backward. He lived by a simple maxim from the German mathematician Carl Jacobi: invert. Always invert. Jacobi knew that many hard problems in mathematics and in life are best solved when they are turned upside down. If you want to help India, you don't just ask, how can I help India? You also ask, what is doing the most damage to India, and how can I avoid it? Charlie took this mathematical principle and turned it into a life philosophy. He realized that while it is very difficult to define exactly what leads to a successful life, it is remarkably easy to list the things that guarantee a failed life. If you simply avoid the things that cause failure, success becomes the natural, unavoidable residue. The how to be miserable exercise. Imagine you want to have a happy, fulfilling life. Instead of looking for happiness hacks, Charlie would tell you to sit down with a pen and paper and design the most miserable life possible. What would you do? You'd probably start by being unreliable. You'd indulge in intense resentment and self-pity. You'd ignore the big ideas of the world and stay a narrow specialist. You'd stay down after your first major failure. You'd use drugs or alcohol to numb your reality. Once you have that list of misery makers, your job becomes incredibly simple. Don't do them. This sounds almost too simple to be profound, but in practice, it is revolutionary. Most people fail not because they don't know what to do, but because they can't stop doing the things that sabotage them. By focusing on the avoidance of stupidity rather than the attainment of brilliance, you bypass the ego-driven traps that trip up the smartest people in the room. Inversion in business and finance. In the world of investing, everyone is looking for the next big thing. They are looking for the 10-bagger stock or the disruptive technology. Charlie inverted the process. He didn't look for the next Google. He looked for reasons to say no. He looked for companies that were prone to obsolescence. He looked for industries with too much competition or management teams that were overly promotional. By filtering out everything that looked like a future disaster, he was left with a handful of high-quality businesses that were almost guaranteed to succeed. Think about the checklist approach. A pilot doesn't get into a cockpit and think about being a hero. He goes through a checklist. Of all the things that could go wrong: engine failure, fuel leaks, ice on the wings, he inverts the flight. He asks, what could kill us today? Then he checks to make sure those things aren't happening. This is how Charlie approached every decision. He wasn't looking to be right. He was looking to be not wrong. He knew that in a compounding game like investing, the biggest enemy isn't a lack of brilliance, it's the catastrophic loss. If you lose 50% of your money, you need to make 100% just to get back to zero. Inversion is the shield that protects your capital from your own impulsivity. The psychology of inversion. Avoiding the Lollapalooza. Inversion isn't just a tactical tool. It's a psychological defense mechanism. One of Charlie's most famous observations was about incentive-caused bias. He famously said, "Never, ever think about something else when you should be thinking about the power of incentives. If you want to understand why a system is broken, don't look at the people. Look at the incentives. If you have a sales team that is paid per lead rather than per sale, Don't be surprised when you get 1,000 low-quality leads. The system is doing exactly what it was designed to do. By inverting the problem, asking, what behavior is this system actually rewarding? You see the truth behind the curtain. Stop blaming bad people and start fixing bad systems. This allows you to navigate corporate politics, family dynamics, and even your own habits with a level of clarity that others lack. Mungerisms, the aphorisms of reality. To supplement his inversion, Charlie used what fans call Mungerisms. Short, punchy, often biting observations that strip away the fluff of modern life. These weren't just quotes. They were compressed mental models designed to be remembered in the heat of a decision. I have nothing to add. This was his famous response when Warren Buffett would finish a long explanation at the Berkshire meetings. It was a masterclass in economy of thought. If you have nothing valuable to contribute, the most rational thing you can do is stay silent. Show me the incentive, and I will show you the outcome. This is the ultimate tool for social analysis. Take a simple idea and take it seriously. Charlie believed that most people ignore the basics like compound interest or basic honesty because they aren't sexy enough. But the people who win are the ones who apply the basics with fanatical consistency. Being a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest. His colorful way of describing someone who is trying to solve a complex problem without the right mental tools. These Mungerisms serve as tripwires. When you find yourself getting excited about a risky investment or a get-rich-quick scheme, a Mungerism should pop into your head like a warning light. Am I being the one-legged man? Does my incentive cause bias clouding my judgment? The wisdom of the abominable nomen? Charlie earned this nickname because he said no to almost everything. He believed that a great life is built on a few big yeses and 10,000 no's. Inversion helps you find the courage to say no. When you invert your schedule, you stop asking, what should I do today? And start asking, what is a waste of my limited time on earth? You realize that most meetings, most emails, and most social obligations are just friction that keeps you from your deep work and your big ideas. This is why Charlie and Warren spent most of their days just sitting and reading. To the outside world, they looked lazy, but they were actually being incredibly efficient. They were waiting for the fat pitch, the one opportunity where all their mental models lined up and the risk was minimal. They weren't swinging at every ball. They were inverting the game of baseball. They knew that in investing there are no called strikes. You can stand at the plate as long as you want, waiting for the perfect moment. Practice your personal inversion list. To close this chapter, I want you to try a practical exercise. Take a goal you have right now. Maybe it's building a successful YouTube channel or being a better parent. Now, invert it. Ask, how could I absolutely guarantee that my YouTube channel fails? Consistency? I'll post once every 3 months. Quality? I'll record with a blurry camera and bad audio. Audience? I'll talk only about myself and never provide value. Ego? I'll refuse to look at my analytics or learn from my mistakes. Now, look at that list. If you just make sure you don't do those 4 things, you are already ahead of 90% of the people on the platform. Inversion doesn't give you the secret sauce to greatness. It removes the poison that prevents it. The philosophical depth of inversion? At its core, inversion is about intellectual honesty. It is about admitting that our brains are naturally wired for self-delusion, optimism, and ego. We want to believe the world is easy and that we are special. Inversion is the cold, hard reality check. It forces us to look at the downside and the dark side. By embracing the possibility of failure by literally planning for its train, it of its power. You become antifragile. You don't just survive the sinking ship we talked about in the introduction. You are the one who predicted the iceberg because you were the only one willing to ask, what is the worst thing that could happen, and are we prepared for it? Key takeaway: you don't need to be brilliant to succeed. You just need to be consistently less stupid than everyone else. By inverting your problems and focusing on what to avoid, you clear a path for success to find you. But even with inversion and a latticework of models, there is one final frontier we must conquer: the glitches in our own biology. This is what Charlie called the psychology of human misjudgment, and it is the most important chapter in the book. Chapter 4: The Foundation of Discipline, Practical Thought, and the Art of Stock Picking. If you were to walk into Charlie Munger's office during his prime, you wouldn't find a frantic trader staring at 6 flickering screens of green and red candles. You wouldn't find a man shouting into a telephone about buying the dip. Instead, you would find a man sitting in a comfortable chair, surrounded by piles of annual reports and biographies, occasionally sipping a Diet Coke. To the casual observer, it looked like nothing was happening. But in reality, a high-stakes hunt was underway. This chapter moves from the abstract philosophy of the latticework into the tactical trenches of decision-making. Charlie believed that if you want to win at the game of life and, specifically, the game of wealth, you have to move past intuition and adopt a rigorous, almost military-grade discipline. The checklist, the pilot's secret to wealth. One of Munger's most vital contributions to the world of practical thought is the concept of the investment checklist. He often drew a parallel between a fund manager and a commercial airline pilot. A pilot might have 30,000 hours of flight time. He might be the most brilliant flyer in the world, but he never ever takes off without going through his checklist. Why? Because the human brain is a leaky bucket. Under pressure, or when we're tired, or when we're overconfident, we forget the basics. We forget to check the fuel, forget to check the wind. In the world of stock picking, the fuel is the company's cash flow, and the wind is the competitive landscape. Charlie's checklist wasn't just a list of numbers. It was a list of qualitative filters. He would ask, is this business within my circle of competence? Do I actually understand how they make money? Does it have a moat? Is it protected from competitors by a brand, a patent, or a network effect? Is the management team honest and able? Are they working for the shareholders or just for their own bonuses? Is the price fair? Even the best company is a bad investment if you pay too much for it. If a company failed a single one of these checks, Charlie didn't negotiate with himself. He didn't say, well, the management is bad, but the price is so cheap. He simply tossed the report into the too hard pile. Most people's too hard piles are empty because they think they have to have an opinion on everything. Charlie's too hard pile was a mountain. He was looking for the no-brainers. The circle of competence, staying in your lane. One of the hardest things for a smart person to do is admit they don't know something. Our egos want us to be experts on AI, the housing market, and the price of oil all at once. Charlie called this a one-way ticket to the poorhouse. He advocated for a radical narrowing of focus. He believed that you don't need to be an expert on 1,000 companies to get rich. You only need to be an expert on a few. If you understand the business of selling candy like See's Candies, or the business of insurance like Geico, you should stay there. The circle of competence isn't about how big the circle is. It's about where the boundary is. If you know exactly where your knowledge ends and your guessing begins, you are ahead of 99% of the world. Charlie's success didn't come from knowing more than everyone else. It came from knowing what he didn't know and having the discipline to stay away from those areas. He was perfectly happy to let other people make millions in tech stocks while he sat on the sidelines, because he knew he didn't have an edge in that field. The surfing analogy, riding the great waves of business. In his lectures, Charlie used a beautiful analogy to describe the competitive nature of business. Surfing. Imagine a massive wave of technological or social change like the invention of the automobile or the rise of the internet. In the beginning, many people try to surf that wave. Most of them wipe out. But a few companies get on the board early, find their balance, and ride that wave for decades. The key for an investor or a thinker is to identify the great waves before they've already crashed on the shore. But there's a catch. You don't just look for the wave. You look for the early mover advantage. Charlie observed that once a company like Microsoft or Coca-Cola gets a dominant position on a wave, it becomes incredibly difficult to knock them off. They develop scale advantages. Their unit costs go down, their brand recognition goes up, and they begin to benefit from the Lollapalooza effect of multiple advantages compounding at once. However, Charlie also cautioned that even the best surfers eventually fall. He studied the inertia of giant corporations, how they become slow, bloated, and stupid over time. He watched how great companies like Sears or Kodak, which once owned the world, were eventually eaten by smaller, hungrier sharks. This taught him to look for anti-fragility, the ability of a company to not just survive a wave, but to get stronger because of the chaos. The art of stock picking, waiting for the fat pitch. Munger's approach to investing can be summed up in one word: patience. He often cited Ted Williams, one of the greatest hitters in baseball history. Williams had a philosophy called the science of hitting. He divided the strike zone into 77 small squares, each the size of a baseball. He knew that if he only swung at balls in his sweet spot, he would bat .400. If he swung at balls in the corners, his average dropped 2.250. Most investors feel like they have to swing at every ball the market throws at them. They see a stock go up 10%, and they feel the fever of missing out. Charlie had the emotional discipline to stand at the plate and watch strike after strike go by. He might not swing for 2 years, but when a fat pitch finally came, a wonderful company, at a ridiculously low price, he didn't just tap it. He swung with everything he had. This is the focused portfolio strategy. Charlie didn't believe in diversification for the sake of it. He called it diversification. If you have 3 amazing ideas, why would you put your money into your 20th best idea? To Charlie, risk wasn't volatility, how much a stock price moves. Risk was the permanent loss of capital. And the best way to avoid that was to know a few things very well and bet big when the odds were overwhelmingly in your favor. The cigar butt versus quality debate. This is perhaps the most famous part of Munger's history. As we touched on earlier, Warren Buffett started as a student of Benjamin Graham, the father of value investing. Graham's strategy was to find cigar butts companies that were practically dead but were selling so cheaply that there was still one free puff left in them. Charlie hated this. He realized that a cigar butt is a stressful way to live. You're always looking for the next discard. He persuaded Warren to look for quality, argued that if you buy a company that grows its value by 15% every year, you can hold it for 30 years and never have to pay a capital gains tax or find a new investment. This shift changed Berkshire Hathaway from a small investment fund into the largest conglomerate in the world. It required a move from quantitative analysis, counting the pennies, to qualitative analysis, judging the brand, the culture, and the future. Charlie realized that the intangibles, the things you can't see on a balance sheet, are often what create the most value in the long run. Flexion, the moral dimension of business. For Charlie, the art of stock picking wasn't just about greed, it was about ethics. He believed that you should only want to own businesses that you would be proud to show your mother. He despised the shysters and the promoters of Wall Street who sold garbage to people just to collect a commission. He believed in win-win relationships. He wanted to invest in companies that provided real value to their customers, treated their employees well, and acted with integrity. He saw a direct link between good ethics and good business. In the long run, the cheaters usually get caught by their own complexity, while the honest people benefit from the seamless web of deserved trust. How to apply this to your life? You might not be a professional investor, but you are the CEO of your own life. You are constantly investing your time, your energy, and your attention. Create your own life checklist. Before you take a new job or start a new project, what are your non-negotiables? What are the red flags that should make you walk away immediately? Define your circle of competence. What are the 2 to 3 things you are actually world-class at? Spend 80% of your time there. For everything else, either outsource it or simply admit you don't have an opinion. Wait for the fat pitch. Don't feel the need to say yes to every opportunity that comes your way. Wait for the one that perfectly aligns with your skills, your values, and your goals. When it arrives, commit fully. Value quality over cheapness. Whether you're buying a laptop, a pair of shoes, or choosing a mentor, don't just look at the price. Look at the long-term compounding value. Cheap tool that breaks in a month is much more expensive than a high-quality tool that lasts a decade. Key takeaway. Discipline is the ability to say no to 99% of opportunities so that you have the resources to say a massive yes to the 1% that truly matter. Success is a game of patience, waiting for the moments where the odds are in your favor, having the courage to act when they are. But even with a checklist and a circle of competence, there is one major hurdle left: our own biology. We are the descendants of hunter-gatherers whose brains were wired for survival on the savannah, not for making rational decisions in a complex modern economy. To understand why we still fail, we must enter the lab of human misjudgment. Chapter 5. The Interdisciplinary Mind, Breaking the Silos of Thought. In most modern universities and corporations, we have created what Charlie Munger called the silo effect. We have the economics department in one building, the psychology department in another, and the physics department across campus. Debt. They rarely speak to one another. They use different jargon, different methods, and different metrics. Charlie believed this academic segregation was a form of intellectual malpractice. He argued that reality doesn't care about our artificial boundaries. A complex problem like a market crash, a failed product launch, or a family crisis is never just an economics problem or a psychology problem. It is a messy, intertwined knot of multiple forces acting at once. If you only look at it through the lens of one discipline, you are essentially trying to play a piano with only one key. You might hit the right note occasionally, but you'll never play a symphony. The failure of the expert system. Charlie was particularly harsh on the way we educate our professionals. He observed that we take the brightest young minds and force them to specialize so deeply that they become functional, literates in every other field. Think about an architect who understands the physics. It's a building but knows nothing about the psychology of the people who will live in it. Or an economist who builds a beautiful mathematical model but forgets that human beings are prone to panic and greed. These specialists are often dangerous because they have a high degree of confidence but a low degree of worldly wisdom. They are often in error, but never in doubt. Charlie's solution was the interdisciplinary. Mind, he didn't want you to be a jack of all trades and master of none. He wanted you to be a master of the big ideas in every trade. He believed that the major principles of the big disciplines, math, physics, biology, psychology, and ethics, are actually quite easy to learn if you focus on the core rather than the trivia. The symphony of synthesis. To Charlie, the goal of learning wasn't to accumulate facts. It was to develop synthesis. This is the ability to see how an idea in biology explains a phenomenon in business. Take the concept of autocatalysis from chemistry. This is a process where the output of a reaction serves as the catalyst for the same reaction to happen again, faster. It's a self-reinforcing loop. In business, we see this in network effects. The more people use a platform like YouTube, the more valuable it becomes for creators. The more creators join, the more valuable it becomes for viewers. It's an autocatalytic business model. If you only study business, you might call this growth. But if you understand chemistry, you understand the nature of the acceleration. You recognize that once an autocatalytic process starts, it is very hard to stop, and once it stops, it is almost impossible to restart. This interdisciplinary insight gives you a deeper, more intuitive grasp of reality, the critique of the social sciences. Charlie had a particular bone to pick with the social sciences, specifically economics, sociology, and psychology. He believed they suffered from physics envy. They tried to create rigid mathematical laws for human behavior that simply don't exist. He argued that social scientists often ignore the big ideas from other fields because of academic ego. An economist might refuse to acknowledge a psychological bias because it messes up his clean spreadsheet. Charlie called this the man with a hammer syndrome on a societal scale. He advocated for what he called the multi-disciplinary approach to social science. He believed that if you want to understand economics, you must understand the biological drive for status. If you want to understand law, you must understand the psychological tendency of reciprocation. By breaking down these silos, you move from being a scholar to being a thinker. The power of mental models as a universal language. One of the most practical benefits of the interdisciplinary mind is that it provides you with a universal language. When you understand the big ideas, you can talk to a doctor, an engineer, a plumber, or a CEO, and you can understand the logic of their work, even if you don't know their specific jargon. You start to see that the same patterns repeat everywhere. Inertia, seen in physics, objects at rest, and in big corporations' refusal to change. Feedback loops, seen in biology, homeostasis, and in finance market bubbles. The Pareto principle, 80/20ths, seen in nature distribution of species, and in productivity tasks that move the needle. When your mind is trained to look for these patterns, the world stops being a chaotic mess of news and starts being a predictable series of models in action. You gain a sense of intellectual autonomy. You no longer need to wait for an expert to tell you what to think. You have the tools to deconstruct the problem yourself. The moral dimension of learning. Charlie also believed that being interdisciplinary was a moral obligation. If you are in a position of power, if you are a parent, a manager, or a leader, and you make a decision based on a narrow, siloed view of the world, you are likely to cause unintended consequences. He cited the example of incentive-caused bias in the medical profession. A surgeon who only knows how to perform one specific surgery will subconsciously convince himself that every patient needs that surgery. He isn't necessarily a bad person, but his narrow expertise has created a moral blind spot. By broadening your mind, you reduce your blind spots. You become more empathetic because you understand the different forces acting on people. You become more ethical because you can foresee the long-term downstream effects of your actions. For Munger, worldly wisdom wasn't just about getting rich. It was about being a responsible, rational citizen of the world. Reflection. The T-shaped thinker. In modern career coaching, they talk about being a T-shaped person. Deep expertise in one area, the vertical bar, and a broad understanding of many areas, the horizontal bar. Charlie Munger was the ultimate T-shaped thinker. But he would argue that the horizontal bar is what actually protects your vertical expertise. Your deep knowledge of your craft is your hammer, but your broad knowledge of the world is what tells you when to put the hammer down and pick up a screwdriver. It is the command and control center of your intellect. How to practice interdisciplinary thinking. How do you break out of your own silo? Read outside your field. If you love history, read a book on game theory. If you love technology, read a book on evolutionary psychology. Look for cross-pollination. When you learn a new concept, try to explain it using an analogy from a completely different world. For example, this marketing strategy is like a virus in biology, because find the linchpin ideas. Don't try to learn everything. Find the ideas that appear in multiple disciplines. Those are the linchpin ideas that hold reality together. Practice steel manning. When you disagree with someone from another silo, try to build the strongest possible version of their argument using their discipline's models. The ultimate reward, intellectual freedom. The interdisciplinary mind is the only path to true intellectual freedom. As long as you are trapped in a silo, you are a prisoner of someone else's framework. You are seeing the world through a filter that you didn't choose. But when you build the lattice work, when you understand the physics, the biology, and the psychology of a situation, the filters fall away. You see the world in high definition, see the interconnectedness of all things as the polymaths of the Renaissance did. You become, in the truest sense of the word, an individual. Key takeaway. Knowledge is not a collection of isolated facts. It is a web of interconnected principles. To solve real-world problems, you must break out of your specialized silo and learn to synthesize the big ideas from every major field of study. But even the most brilliant interdisciplinary mind can be hijacked by the primitive wiring of our brains. To truly master our thoughts, we must look at the glitches in our evolutionary hardware. We must face the 25 tendencies that lead to human misjudgment. Chapter 6. The Moral Compass. Philanthropy, Ethics. It's in the seamless web of trust. Most books about billionaires focus on the how, the mechanics of the trade, the aggression of the negotiation, and the accumulation of the prize. But as we move into the later lectures of poor Charlie's Almanack, the tone shifts. It becomes quieter, more reflective, and deeply philosophical. Charlie Munger understood a truth that many successful people learn too late. Wealth without a moral framework is just a high score in a meaningless game. In this section, we explore Charlie's views on the responsibility of the successful. He didn't see philanthropy as just giving money away to look good, saw it as a logical extension of his lifelong pursuit of rationality. He believed that a society functions best when it is built on a seamless web of deserved trust, and that every person of influence has a duty to strengthen that web rather than tear it for personal gain. The seamless web of deserved trust. This is perhaps one of Charlie's most profound concepts. Think about a high-stakes surgical team or the crew of a nuclear submarine. In those environments, if one person cuts a corner or lies about a measurement, people die. To function, they must have absolute, 100% trust in one another. Charlie argued that the most efficient way for a civilization to work and, for a business to thrive, is to replicate that web of trust. When you have to have a 500-page contract for every tiny transaction, the transaction costs of life become unbearable. But when you deal with people who are deservedly trustworthy, the friction of life disappears. You don't need the contract. You just need a handshake. Charlie and Warren often bought multi-million-dollar companies with nothing more than a few sheets of paper and a conversation. They didn't do this because they were naive. They did it because they were masters of qualitative analysis. They only dealt with people who were already part of that seamless web. The ethics of the win-win. Charlie had a deep-seated loathing for win-lose scenarios. He believed that any business model that relied on the customer being stupid or uninformed was a bad business model. He looked at certain parts of the financial industry, those that sold complex products with hidden fees, and he didn't just call them unethical, he called them irrational. Why? Because in the long run, the world catches on. If you treat people poorly, you destroy your reputation, and in Munger's world, reputation is the most valuable compounding asset you own. He believed in the Kohlberg stages of moral development. Moving from doing the right thing to avoid punishment to doing the right thing because it is the most rational way for a system to survive. He often cited the Mayo Clinic or Costco as examples of ethical excellence. Costco, for instance, famously refuses to mark up its products beyond a certain percentage, even when they could icily charge more. To a short-term thinker, that's leaving money on the table. To Charlie, it's building a mode of trust with the customer that will last for 50 years. Philanthropy is rational problem solving. When Charlie turned his attention to giving, he didn't do it emotionally. He didn't want his name on a building just for the sake of ego. He wanted to solve architectural and educational problems. He famously designed student dormitories and science centers himself, focusing on human interaction and light. He applied his latticework of mental models to philanthropy. He asked, how can I design a space that forces students to talk to each other across disciplines? He used the principles of social psychology and environmental engineering to create physical spaces that fostered the interdisciplinary mind he valued so much. He also believed that the greatest philanthropy was simply being a good example. By living a life of integrity, by not being a conspicuous consumer, and by sharing his wisdom freely, he believed he was providing more value to the world than a simple check could ever provide. He wanted to be a teaching machine, helping others avoid the sinkholes of life. It's the duty of intellectual honesty. A significant part of Charlie's ethics was the moral obligation to be rational. He believed that if you have a high IQ and a good education, and you still make decisions based on prejudice, ego, or laziness, you are failing your duty to society. Intellectual honesty means being your own harshest critic. It means admitting when you were wrong loudly and clearly. Charlie and Warren would often spend the first 30 minutes of their annual meetings talking. It's about their mistakes of omission. They wanted the world to see that even geniuses trip up, and that the only way to stay ethical is to be transparent about those failures. For Charlie, lying to yourself was the first step toward lying to others. If you can't be honest with the man in the mirror, you cannot be part of the seamless web of trust, wealth, status, and the rat race. Charlie lived in the same house for decades. He didn't own a fleet of supercars or a mega yacht. He viewed conspicuous consumption as a psychological trap-a-lollapalooza of envy, status, anxiety, and social proof. He argued that once you have enough money to be independent, additional money has a diminishing marginal utility. If you spend your life chasing more and more stuff, you are letting the primitive parts of your brain run the show. You are becoming a slave to your own biology. True prosperity, in Munger's view, was the ability to spend your time however you wanted, with people you liked, doing things that were intellectually stimulating. He viewed wealth as a shield that protected his independence, not a sword to show off his status. The philosophical legacy, the old man perspective. In his later years, Charlie spoke often about the end game. He saw his life as a long-form experiment in worldly wisdom. He knew he couldn't take his billions with him, but he could leave behind a blueprint for rationality. He wanted to be remembered not as a moneymaker, but as a teacher of reality. He believed that the ultimate ethical act was to reduce the unnecessary suffering in the world by teaching people how to think clearly. If you can stop one person from making a ruinous financial decision, or one parent from passing down a misjudgment tendency to their child, you have improved the world. How to apply this to your life? You don't need to be a billionaire to apply the ethics of the Almanack. Build your own web of trust. Be the person who does what they say they will do. Be painfully reliable. Eventually, people will stop asking for contracts and start asking for your partnership. Seek win-win outcomes in every negotiation, whether it's with your boss, your spouse, or your child. Oh, can we both walk away feeling like we won? Avoid the short-term gain that creates long-term resentment. Practice intellectual hygiene. Once a year, sit down and list your 3 biggest mistakes. Don't hide them. Analyze them. What tendency caused them? How can you avoid them next time? Redefine success. Stop measuring your life by what you own and start measuring it by how much independence you have and how many people trust you. Be a teaching machine. Share what you know. Not in a know-it-all way, but as a way of strengthening the collective rationality of your circle. Key takeaway. True wealth is not found in the accumulation of assets, but in the creation of a seamless web of trust. Ethics and rationality are not separate goals. They are the same path. By being honest, reliable, and win-win oriented, you build a life that is both prosperous and profoundly meaningful. We have explored the man, his lattice, his tools, and his morals. Now it is time to face the final and most important part of the journey. We are going to go under the hood of the human brain to see why we are all, by default, a little bit insane. Chapter 7. The main event. The psychology of human misjudgment. If you only take one lesson from Charlie Munger's life, let it be this. Your brain is a biological masterpiece, but it is also a glitchy, outdated piece of hardware. We are walking around in the 21st century with software designed for the Stone Age. On the savannah, you saw a crowd running, you didn't stop to perform a cost-benefit analysis, you ran. That was social proof, and it kept you alive. Today, that same instinct causes people to buy into housing bubbles and crypto scams. Charlie spent decades synthesizing what he called the 25 tendencies of human misjudgment. He realized that even the most brilliant physicists and investors fail because they are blindsided by their own evolutionary blind spots. He didn't just want to list these glitches. He wanted to understand how they combine to create what he called the Lollapalooza effect, a nuclear explosion of stupidity that occurs when multiple biases point in the same direction. Let's walk through the most powerful of these glitches and see how they are currently shaping your life. 1. Reward and punishment superresponse tendency. Charlie's first rule was simple. Never, ever think about something else when you should be thinking about the power of incentives. Most people think they are in control of their actions, but they are actually puppets of their incentive structures. Charlie often told the story of Federal Express, where night shift workers couldn't get the planes loaded on time, no matter how much they were exhorted. Finally, someone realized they were paying the workers by the hour. They switched to paying by the shift, allowing workers to go home as soon as the planes were loaded. Suddenly, the planes were moving like clockwork. If you want to understand why a doctor recommends a surgery, why a lawyer wants to go to trial, or why a salesman says you need the premium package, don't look at their character. Look at their commission structure. Whose bread I eat, his song I sing. 2. Liking, loving, and disliking. Hating tendency. We are remarkably bad at being objective about people we like or dislike. If we love someone, we ignore their faults and cherry-pick evidence to support them. If we hate someone, we ignore their virtues and find ways to twist their successes into luck. This is why love is blind isn't just a romantic cliché. It's a financial and political disaster. In business, we often buy from people we like, even if their product is inferior. In politics, we ignore the corruption of our guy while screaming about the other guy. Charlie's antidote, extreme objectivity, must force yourself to see the flaws in what you love and the merits in what you hate. 3. Doubt avoidance and inconsistency. The human brain hates the feeling of not knowing. Doubt creates a state of tension, so we rush to a conclusion just to find relief. Once we have reached that conclusion, we become locked in by the inconsistency avoidance tendency. We want to be consistent with our past selves. If you publicly announce you believe in a certain stock, or a certain diet, or a certain political ideology, your brain will literally filter out any information that suggests you were wrong. Changing your mind feels like a defeat. Charlie, however, viewed destroying your own best-loved ideas as a form of intellectual hygiene. He knew that the faster you can admit you were wrong, the faster you can get back to being right. 4. Reciprocation tendency. We have a deep-seated urge to return favors. If someone gives you a small gift, you feel an overwhelming pressure to give something back. This is why charities send you free address labels in the mail. They know your brain's reciprocation glitch will trigger a donation. In business, this is used against you constantly. A free lunch or a small favor from a supplier creates a psychological debt that you often repay with a much larger irrational contract. Charlie's advice? Beware of the gift that carries a hidden price tag. 5. Social proof tendency. This is the herd mentality. We look to others to see how we should act, especially in times of uncertainty. If everyone is panicking, we panic. If everyone is buying a certain tech stock, we buy it. Charlie observed that social proof is most dangerous when we are tired, stressed, or confused. It is the reason why smart people get caught in cults or Ponzi schemes. To beat social proof, you must have the courage to be comfortably contrarian. You must be willing to look like an idiot to the crowd while you wait for the fat pitch we talked about in Chapter 4. 6. Depreval superreaction tendency. We are much more pained by a loss than we are pleased by a gain of the same size. If you lose $100, the pain is twice as intense as the pleasure of finding $100. This causes us to gamble to get back to even, often losing even more in the process. Charlie saw this in the auction effect. Two people get into a bidding war over a company or a piece of art. Neither wants to lose, so they keep bidding far past the rational value. They aren't bidding to win anymore. They're bidding to avoid the depreval of losing. This is how fortunes are lost in an afternoon. 7. Authority mismeasure tendency. Humans are naturally predisposed to follow leaders. In our tribal past, following the chief kept the tribe together. Today, this leads to blind obedience to experts, doctors, and CEOs. Charlie pointed out that many of the world's greatest disasters from the Challenger explosion to financial crashes happen because subordinates saw a mistake but were too intimidated by the authority of their bosses to speak up. He advocated for a flat intellectual structure where the best idea wins, regardless of whose mouth it comes out of. The Lollapalooza effect, the compound interest of stupidity. This was Munger's most famous psychological insight. A single bias is a problem, but a Lollapalooza occurs when 3, 4, or 5 biases all point in the same direction. Take a real estate bubble. Incentive-caused bias. Real estate agents and bankers get paid more if they sell more houses. Social proof. Your neighbor just made $100,000 flipping a house, so you should too. Depreval superreaction. You're afraid of missing out on the boom. Authority mismeasure. The experts on TV say housing prices never go down. Inconsistency. Avoidance. You've already told everyone you're a real estate mogul, so you have to keep buying to prove you were right. When these combine, rationality is completely deleted from the system. The result is a total market collapse. Charlie's life was dedicated to spotting these Lollapaloozas before they hit. The antidote, the checklist, and the 2-track analysis. How do you survive a brain that is actively trying to trick you? Charlie used a 2-track analysis for every major decision. Track 1. What are the rational objective factors here? The math, the physics, the supply and demand. Track 2. What are the psychological glitches at play? Is my brain being hijacked by social proof or incentives? By looking at every problem through these 2 lenses, Charlie was able to stay sane when the world went mad. He didn't try to fix his biology. He knew that was impossible. Instead, he built external scaffolds, checklists, inversion exercises, and a trusted partner buffet to catch his mistakes before they became catastrophes. Reflection. The stoicism of psychology. Ultimately, Charlie's study of psychology wasn't about manipulating others. It was about self-mastery. He believed that the highest form of human achievement was the rational, its mind. A mind that could observe its own biases and choose to act differently. It is a deeply stoic way to live. It requires you to be quiet when others are shouting, to be patient when others are rushing, and to be honest when it hurts your ego. For Charlie, psychology was the final piece of the puzzle. Once you understand the latticework of the world and the glitches of the mind, you are no longer a victim of circumstance. You are the architect of your own rationality. Key takeaway. Our brains are hardwired with 25 tendencies that lead to misjudgment. To succeed, you must learn to recognize these biases, especially when they combine into a Lollapalooza effect, and use checklists and objective analysis to override your primitive instincts. We have journeyed through the man, the methods, the morals, and the mind. Now, as we reach the end of our exploration, it is time to bring it all together. What is the deeper message of Charlie Munger for the 21st century? Conclusion: the art of living wisely in an irrational world. We have traveled through the life and mind of a man who was often called a book with legs. We have deconstructed the latticework, inverted our problems, stood at the plate waiting for the fat pitch, and peered into the glitchy hardware of our own biology. But as we close the cover on poor Charlie's Almanack, we must ask, what is the ultimate signal amidst all this noise? If we were to distill 99 years of lived wisdom into a single drop of essence, what would it be? The deeper message of Charlie Munger isn't about how to accumulate $1 billion. It is about the moral and intellectual obligation to be rational. In our modern era, we are bombarded by a lollapalooza of distractions. We live in an attention economy that profits from our social proof and our deprivile superreaction. We are encouraged to have opinions on everything and deep knowledge of nothing. Munger's life stands as a defiant stoic counterargument to the chaos of the present. He proves that a quiet life of reading, reflection, and the consistent avoidance of stupidity can produce results that look like magic to the frantic observer. The psychological impact of the Munger way. Adopting the Munger mind changes your relationship with the world. When you stop looking for tips and start building models, your anxiety begins to evaporate. Why? Because you realize that while the world is complex, the rules that govern it are stable. Physics doesn't change. The basic drive for human status doesn't change. The power of compound interest doesn't change. When you anchor your life to these big ideas, you stop being a leaf blown about by the winds of the daily news cycle. You become a tree with deep roots. You gain a sense of intellectual autonomy. You no longer feel the need to check your phone to see what you should believe today. You have the tools to figure it out for yourself. This is the psychological moat that Charlie built. He was comfortable being alone with his thoughts because his thoughts were high quality. He didn't need the external validation of the crowd because he had the internal validation of a rational process. In a world struggling with a crisis of mental health and status anxiety, Munger's philosophy offers a path to a calm, dignified, and self-reliant existence. Practical principles for a rational life. To leave this guided journey and enter back into the world. Here are 5 practical principles extracted from the Almanack that you can apply starting today. Be a learning machine. Spend at least 1 hour every day purely on the acquisition of worldly wisdom. Read widely. Read biographies. Read about things that have nothing to do with your job. As Charlie said, go to bed every night a little wiser than when you woke up. Practice active inversion. The next time you face a difficult problem, don't ask how to solve it. Ask, what would guarantee a disaster here? Write down those failure points and build a moat around them. Audit your incentives. Look at your own life and the lives of those around you. Are you doing things because they are right or because you are being subtly paid to do them? Change your environment to align your incentives with your long-term values. Destroy one idea every year. Make it a habit to find your most cherished belief about business, politics, or yourself and try to prove it wrong. If you can't find a single thing you were wrong about this year, you haven't been thinking hard enough. Seek the seamless web of trust. Be the most reliable person you know, not because it's nice, but because it is the most efficient way to live. When people know they can trust you without a contract, the best opportunities in the world will find their way to your door. A final reflection. Charlie Munger often told the story of a man who, at his funeral, had a friend say, he was a good man, but he wasn't much of a hand at avoiding the things that kill you. Charlie spent his entire life trying to be the man who did avoid those things. He didn't want to be a hero. He wanted to be a survivor. He didn't want to be a genius. He wanted to be sane. And in doing so, he became one of the most respected thinkers of our time. He showed us that the good life is not a destination you reach by working harder, but a garden you tend by removing the weeds of misjudgment. Once it is a slow, compounding process of getting the big ideas right and keeping your ego out of the driver's seat. As you step away from this summary and back into the flow of your life, I want to leave you with one open-ended question that Charlie might have asked you over a box of peanut brittle. If you continue to think the way you are thinking and act the way you are acting, what is the Lollapalooza outcome of your life 20 years from now? Are you brave enough to invert it today? Key takeaway: The ultimate goal of the Munger mind is to achieve a state of intellectual and financial independence through the disciplined application of worldly wisdom and the moral courage to remain rational in an irrational world. Thank you for joining me on this guided intellectual journey through the mind of Charlie Munger. This concludes our deep dive into Poor Charlie's Almanack.